Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the November edition of the Southeast Climate Monthly webinar, where we talk about climate and special topics pertaining to the Southeast region. I am Sandra Rain, the regional climatologist from the Southeast Regional Climate Center, and I will be given a climate overview. Our speakers today are Jeff Dober from the Southeast River Forecast Center, who will provide a water resources overview, Pam Knox from the University of Georgia, who will give an agricultural impact update, and our special topics speaker, Luann Dahlman from NOAA's Climate Program, talking about getting a feel for your community's climate future. We thank them all for joining us. Just a reminder to type your questions and comments in the question box at any time during the webinar, and they will all be answered at the end. Also, a recap email of this webinar will be sent out later today with a YouTube link to this recording. Okay, so let's talk about the climate. Temperatures over the past 30 days were near average, and that's partly due to the cool down we've had at the beginning of November. But if we look at the month of October, it was actually a warm month. Virginia had its 5th warmest October on record. Many areas saw about 2 to 4 degrees above average. Williamsburg, Virginia saw its warmest October on record. But now that we've had November and the cool down, it really is starting to feel like fall. As far as the precipitation, it's been mostly dry across the region, which is typical for this time of year. However, Columbus, Georgia observed its wettest October on record with over 8 inches of rainfall. But for the most part, everywhere else in the region has been drying out, which is a big difference considering we've had a pretty wet summer and spring. We're still dealing with the tropical season, which officially ends on November 30th. So far, we have made it through the list of names to Wanda. And should anything else develop, we will use the supplemental names list created by the World Meteorological Organization. We will no longer be using the Greek alphabet. And we did have a tropical storm in October, Tropical Storm Wanda, which was named on October 30th. Fortunately, it stayed out to sea. Currently, the National Hurricane Center is watching an area off North Carolina that has little chance of developing into something. So we are under a La Niña advisory. La Niña conditions have developed and are expected to continue with an 87% chance of La Niña through December to February. The next update will come out this Thursday, November 11th. The current U.S. Drought Monitor still shows exceptional drought out west, although it is improving and hopefully it will significantly decrease this winter. Closer to home, however, abnormally dry conditions have expanded throughout the Carolinas, with pockets of moderate drought appearing by the beginning of November. We can expect that drought to persist with the current drought outlook, and for more drought development likely, especially in Florida. The 3-month outlook shows a very typical La Niña pattern with the probability of warmer than normal temperatures and the probability of drier than normal conditions for most of the Southeast region. However, in the 6 to 10 day outlook, which is from November 13th through 17th, there is a probability of cooler than normal temperatures with probability of drier than normal conditions in the western half of the region and the probability of wetter than normal conditions along the coast of North Carolina and Virginia. As far as the rest of this week, it looks like a cold front will come through Thursday or Friday through the region, and that's going to be our best chance for any rain. But otherwise, it should be warmer than normal before the cold front and drier after. The National Weather Service in Raleigh has given us this satellite image still showing some fall color in the mountains of western North Carolina. So if you get a chance sometime this week to get out and see it, it might be your last chance to do so, as many areas are starting to report being past peak with many leaves browning and falling off the trees. So to wrap up, October was warm, but so far November has been cooler. Tropical season ends on November 30th, and we are under a La Niña advisory with the next update this Thursday. Expect the typical La Niña pattern over the next 3 months, with warmer than normal temperatures and drier than normal precipitation. And if you can, this might be your last week to see some fall color in the mountains. All right, I'll hand it over to Jeff with the water resources update.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. And as Sandra said, we've had some dry weather here the last several weeks, and this has helped stream flows fall back into normal levels across a good part of the southeast. We still have some lingering above normal stream flows there across Alabama and Georgia and parts of North Florida, especially the Panhandle and some of the smaller coastal rivers. But for the most part, we're seeing most stream flow start to have an overall decline with the drier weather here especially the last couple of weeks. And that's what you see there in the map view of the southeast on the left. And then on the right here, you can see our long-standing 28-day stream flow for the southeast region has been in that above normal range really since the early summertime. And we just now have fallen into the near normal range, and we'll talk more about that. But for the most part, overall in the southeast, we've seen stream flows decline. Next slide. Now, when we look at as we always do, the individual states, we can see across Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, where we've seen the higher stream flows, across the western sections of the southeast region, which has been wet for most of the summer. Now, this recent dryness, we're starting to see stream flows fall off in all 3 states and look to be approaching or in that normal range as we go into late November. The next slide will show the eastern sections of the southeast. This is the Carolinas and Virginia. And of course, they've been a little bit more in the normal range for most of the summer. Not as wet over there, and continue to be in that normal range. Now, as you can see in all the annual hydrographs here provided by the U.S. Geological Survey, normals start to typically increase as we go into the primary recharge period here in late November and December. So that green band you can see increases, as well as the other bands increase as far as values as we go into the winter time period. And this is important to make note of. So we go into the next slide here. And you can see where our current river conditions, flooding pretty much non-existent across most of the southeast, though we did have some recent rainfall there across North Florida in the last week. And we've got some high water in the Santa Fe Basin there in North Florida that drains into the Suwannee Basin there. Those are the yellow squares you see. And then we've got some minor flooding at McClenny, Florida, as well as some moderate flooding on the St. Johns River right now at Astor, Florida. They're experiencing some, and this is mainly induced by rainfall, but surge as well as some strong north winds over Lake George that are pushing some of the water into the Astor area. So moderate flooding there. So just some spotty flooding across the southeast right now. Next slide. And this is pretty typical not to have too much flooding this time of year. We're actually coming out of typically one of the quietest times as far as river flooding. We're in week 45. And as we go into week 46 and through the end of the year, we generally see an uptick in river flood events as we go into a more active jet stream and the primary recharge period. Next slide. And so overall, our late autumn to winter flood outlook, or more or less our flood outlook, stream flow outlook, going through January 2022 calls for typical stream flows. I think we're going to see near normal across most of Georgia and Alabama and the Carolinas, but we will potentially see some spotty below normal as we continue to see the dry weather into the late autumn and early winter, especially across the Carolinas. We'll have to watch that closely as Sandra pointed out, some potential drought development in those areas. As far as the river flood risk, it'll continue to be in that area across South Alabama and the North Florida area, that panhandle area, especially in the smaller coastal rivers. And South Florida looks more like typical flooding. We're going into the dry season for the Florida Peninsula, so usually flooding is not very common across the Florida Peninsula. Next slide. So in summary, near normal stream flows do continue across the Southeast. We still see some above normal there in South Alabama and South Georgia, the southern halves of those two states, as well as North Florida. But then we also have that spotty below normal stream flows there that seem to be growing and becoming more evident across the Carolinas and southern Virginia, especially North Carolina and southern Virginia. So we'll have to keep a close eye on that. As far as reservoirs across the Southeast, most of them are near their target pools, and you will start to see many of them decline into their winter pools here over the next month, now through January, heading into their winter pools. So for the most part, water resources remains more than adequate across the region. And we actually do have some remaining heightened risk for flooding, especially in some small coastal rivers of North Florida and South Alabama going into the early winter. But for the most part, overall, pretty typical for this time of year for the Southeast. And that's all I had. So I will pass it on over to Pam.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're approaching the end of the growing season for a lot of the region, and so we'll be talking about that just a bit. Sandra's already talked about the departure from temperature and precipitation. You can see it's been relatively warmer than normal, especially in October. It's been a lot cooler since then. And with the exception of the storm the last few days, really it's been quite dry compared to normal. So we've seen an expansion of the abnormally dry conditions along the eastern seaboard. In the soil moisture map here on the right, you can see the remains of that storm that moved through that Jeff talked about causing localized flooding, made the soils there very wet, but that's probably going to be a short-term tendency, and we're probably going to go back to drier conditions. And so that will be something to keep an eye on in the next 30 days. Let's go on. Here are some of the impacts of the recent conditions on agriculture. Those dry conditions really have helped. Farmers don't mind having dry conditions this time of year because it's a lot easier to get harvest done of a lot of the crops. Areas that have been wet have seen some issues with cotton quality. And I did note there was a story in Southeast Farm Press that talked about how North Carolina is really seeing a great year for cotton because it was wet early in the year and then it dried out. And so they didn't have to put as many agricultural chemicals on. The cotton quality is great and the yield is great. So they're having a fantastic year there. Other places, not quite so much. Generally, vegetable crops are doing pretty well. You can see a nice picture of collards there from South Carolina. And everybody's getting ready for the Thanksgiving market, so they're happy to have that. Strawberries are being planted now in South Carolina and some other places like that. Since the weather has been cold, it means the strawberries have been a little bit low to get established. And so some farmers have been using row covers to try to help increase the temperatures a little bit and get them more established before it really gets cold. Some farmers have just not even planted this year because they were so delayed from wet soil earlier this season that they just couldn't get in and get the plants established before they get to their frost date. So that's a decision that they always have to make when they're watching the clock. Farmers are continuing their fall planting of forage and winter grains. And if you look at the crop progress reports from the different states, almost every state, the harvest of most crops is running behind the 5-year average. That has a lot to do with the rainfall we had earlier this year, but they're certainly going to catch up this week and next week. If we go on. Here's a couple of nice maps talking about frost season. We've seen frost in a few parts of the Southeast already. We're going to see more this weekend after the cold front goes through. The map on the left-hand side there shows areas that have already received frost. I should tell you this was done before yesterday's frost. There was some frost up, I know, in Blairsville, in the northeast part of Georgia and other places. So this is already a little bit old. It's that time of year. And you can see on the right-hand side there is a list of counties that are susceptible to frost where the National Weather Service is watching those temperatures pretty closely. And there's a lot of northern Georgia and Alabama that are susceptible. And so when we get a frost, that's going to be the end of their growing season coming up pretty soon. Other parts closer to the coast and lower elevations probably are not going to see freezing this weekend. They might see some isolated frost. If we go on, here's a projection of what the temperature is likely to be. This map is for next week, Tuesday, so a week from today. You can see the area in blue there is an area where it's expected to get to freezing 32 degrees or below. What's likely to happen is that cold air is going to come in behind the front, and we're going to have an advection of cold and dry air, which will keep the winds up probably the first night on Monday. And then the second night, the high is going to be parked right over us, like it has been for a lot of the last few weeks. So we are likely to get radiative frost on Tuesday, November 16. And so that's something to keep an eye on. You can see the map here on the right-hand side shows the average date of first frost, and we're pretty much right on that average for a lot of the region, and so not anything too surprising. If we go on, the rainfall the next week, Sandra already mentioned this, is relatively light. Almost all of that half inch or so in a lot of the area is going to be associated with that front moving through Thursday through Friday or Saturday. After that, it will be dry again, and it's probably going to be dry for most of the next week. And so people that are working out in the fields will have those dry conditions to really try to catch up the harvest there. But I think it looks like it's going to be pretty good in most places. If we go on, some of the threats to agriculture. When I wrote this, there was still a little bit of a hint that we might have some tropical activity in the Atlantic. That has gone away. It's getting pretty late in the year, so I don't know that we're going to see anything else. Dry conditions should really allow a lot of field work to be completed. It looks like towards the end of the month, it probably will go back to wetter conditions. And so that's something to keep in mind. And La Niña, as Sandra pointed out, is definitely in action right now, and it's going to play an increasing role over the winter. Could be gone by spring. We'll have to watch that pretty carefully because quite often in the summer, after La Niña ends, we do tend to see some dry conditions. So we'll be watching that. And here's just a bigger picture of the image that Sandra showed. You can see there's high pressure over us, really no clouds at all. It's going to be like that a lot of the next week. And you can see there a hint of the colors along the Appalachians. Wish I had time to go up there, but I do not. So I'll just have to wait for the colors to come to us here in Athens. And so if we go on, my summary, the dry weeks that we've had over the last month or so have allowed a lot of field work, planting, and harvest to catch up, depending on what crop you're looking at. And that's likely to continue for at least the next week or two. We are seeing a slow increase of dry conditions, as that's showing up in the drought monitor. At this point, of course, most crops are done, so that's not a major threat at this point. Something to keep in mind watching for the next spring if we don't get enough recharge into the soils. Frost is likely to end the growing season for many northern farmers this weekend. So far, the southern areas may get frost, but probably not freeze. So there may be limited damage farther to the south. And then the tropical season is probably done, but La Niña will continue at least through early spring. So those are the long-range issues that we are dealing with. And that's all I've got. So I'm going to pass the baton on to our guest speaker. Welcome.
Great. I'll take a moment to thank you, Pam, and to Jeff, and to Sandra. My name is Meredith. I just wanted to introduce our next speaker as I go ahead and change the controls over. We're really lucky to have Luann here from the Climate Program Office, and she is going to give you an interactive walkthrough, some really great and updated tools to further explore what future climate looks like in your area. So thank you for joining us today, Luann.
Thank you for having me, Meredith. Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Climate Resilience Toolkit today. Our top picture changes once per month, and currently we have the Southwest on it, but be assured there are plenty of Southeast resources as well. While we're still in the middle of COP26 and there's a recent Working Group 1 report from the IPCC. Lots of folks are wondering, what is it going to look like in the next few decades? And that's what I'm going to show you, a resource that can help you know that and show that to others. And the toolkit, by the way, is the US government's attempt to give us some tools that can help us adapt to new conditions. One of those things is knowing what those conditions are. So on this page, the first thing I'm going to do is actually go to use the Climate Explorer to check conditions projected for the future. And I like to take you to this tool through there so that you can see there are 2 versions of the tool. I want to let you know that, because when I'm not here giving a demonstration, you may wonder, what was that? And so we have given access to an introductory version of the tool. It's actually the tool on the right, and it's embedded in a story map, and it has great little try this, and really walks people through what are you looking at, what do these show, and then gives ideas for exploring. This is useful for someone that wants to get to the point that they can show the tool themselves, or someone that just hasn't used it before. But in most cases, if you want to just explore your upcoming climate, you can just click the Launch the Climate Explorer button. And you'll see the tool. And I'm going to start by going to Hotlanta. And we'll just look at some things that help us understand how hot it is. What we're going to get is climate projections for every county in the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. And that wasn't easy. The main part of this that I usually take people to is the climate graphs. We're going to pop in here, and I'm going to show you a couple of the features. First of all, again, it's by county, and the default is average daily maximum temperature. However, we have a number of variables that you can look at. And when you first get here, you might wonder, you might think it's a little complex, but there are things that help you explore it. First of all, you can just put your cursor on it and get some readouts. If you get tired of that thing chasing your cursor around, you can click and it will pin it, and then you can just go to different places. There's also an about that is very helpful with what are we looking at here, because it's a little complex, and letting people take a look at that right when they get there is useful. So, and last but not least, we can turn these various elements on and off. So the modeled history, what climate models expected climate to look like versus the observations of what occurred, compared with, for lower and higher emissions futures, what the projections are for each of those. And so if we look at this and we say in 2040, I can take a look at this and say, back in the late 1900s, the end of the last century, it was about 72. By the 2040s, maybe an average of 76 or 75, depending on which emissions scenario. But we also include these range. And this is really important because even though we have this average for the historical period, you can see that for a lot of time it was below, and it's also been above. So that range that we've seen in the observations is something we will expect to happen in the future. It's not just going to be a smooth moving upward. Other things that are pretty interesting to look at, I'm going to close that one. Average daily minimum temperature. You can see that this has been above normal for some time, and it's projected to increase even further. That has a lot of implications for urban heat and people that don't have, plants, animals that don't have the opportunity to cool down overnight. One other really interesting one of these is days with maximum temperature over 90. And here's where I ask you to really use your mind's eye to remember what does it feel like when it's over 90 degrees? And you know, if you step out from an air-conditioned location into the ambient air, your glasses fog over and they get slippery and slide down your nose and it's sweaty and it's, we look at how many days of the year that has happened in the past. We get from the late 1900s an average of 35.6. As we move into the 2030s, we can expect the average of 69 or 67, depending on the emission scenario, but as low as 27 or as high as 110 or 113 there. By the time we get out into the 2080s, that miserable over 90 feeling could be happening between, I'm just going to look at the ranges here from 38, just the same as the old average, up to 162 days per year. And these are projections for the future and they're by decade. If you're interested in downloading these, you can download either the chart, the comma separated values of the observations, the history, the projections, etc. I'll point out that you can also, if you're not much on charts, you can go to the map view of this. I'm going to just check. Is there a question that I'm getting? My GoToMeeting is having a, what was calling me?
Sorry, no question. Continue.
Okay, great. So if I just click over to the map interface, we have the ability to compare with the swiper. And it's set up to show you the historical one in 1990 average, and then you can choose what decade you'd like to look at for the future. And you can zoom in and you can choose a county. I'll just try Walton County here. And again, get the same amount, same information. In this, we've added what the population of that county is and how things have changed from the past to the future for the selected decade. I'm going to go back to Cards Home here and show that you can also explore high tide flooding. And this is a station-based tool rather than a county-based tool. So I will, I'm going to check out Charleston here. And what we have is something similar, historical reports, which you can zoom in on to see historically how many sunny day floods have they had or nuisance flooding. And how is that expected to change in the future? Again, with lower and higher emissions, out in the 2080s, you get pretty much to every day of the year, expecting some high tide flooding. And that we have that for about 90 different stations. Now, if you're wondering about, what is high tide flooding and those sorts of things, again, the about gives you a little bit of information, tells where we got our data. It also, this about the data, we have a number of different things that you might wonder where the data came from, who worked on this, all those good things. I do want to show one other thing. When I go to Cards Home here, historical weather data, comparing observed daily weather to long-term climate. Again, choosing a station, and it's interesting. It's for data exploration, but we have the normal climate in the green and the actual temperatures, the low and the high for each day on these. And you can explore past years. And you can see the water, how it was below normal through 2019. You can find things like years when there was, it's kind of interesting to go to Houston and look at Hurricane Harvey on this. There we go. Here's clearly September of 2015. There was a huge rain event here. Similarly, in the sort of checking past weather, you can look at how often things like the rain, how often has more than 1 inch of rain fallen at that station. And right here, you just say, well, up to 25 times. So you can adjust this to come up with something to see, like if you have an asset where you know if you get 3 inches of rain, you're going to be in trouble. Well, that's happened 4 times a year at a couple of years in the past. And then you can go to the archives and find these sorts of weather events. Last but not least on the Climate Explorer, we went to the maps, by the way, from the graphs. But we also have a couple of our partners who have some planning tools. Temperate offers these plain language, future-focused statements like extreme temperatures on the hottest of the day are projected to increase by 6 degrees. And that's it tells you when they're putting those projections out. But these statements can be very useful. And then another group, Headwaters Economics, has a great tool where they have added social vulnerability and temperature projections to help people understand the locations that may need some additional resilience building. I want to go back to the Climate Resilience Toolkit very briefly and mention that we've found that what people really care about when you're talking about what's coming up in climate is not necessarily topics, though we give you the opportunity to consider those things. I'm worried about food, I'm worried about coasts, etc. But we also have regional information. And we have recently, this late spring, just published this Southeast region. Thank you very much. I'm hopeful that some of my contributors are on the call today. But this will give you access to some pages that are plain language narratives about what's happening to the climate. And we have some great custom graphics showing what's happening with the overnight low in this case right here. Some ways for people to explore what's going on in climate in their region. And these are a little bit less dense scientifically than the National Climate Assessment or IPCC reports. And you might be, worried specifically about rural impacts. But all these are regionally focused pages that you can use to share information. And they also come with case studies, what people have done about this. So for instance, alert system helps strawberry growers reduce costs. That's climate related. And also plenty of tools. And please don't ignore our encouragement to look at our steps to resilience. It's a risk management framework that really helps people from any realm have a way to move forward, looking at what might cause problems for their assets and how they can take action to reduce their risk. So that's what I have. Oh, one last thing I want to mention, in the regions, we're very hopeful, ideally by the end of this year, also have a region for the Caribbean, Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. So watch for that, or if you have expertise to contribute, please be in touch with me. I think Meredith will send out my email at the end of this. So if we have any questions, I'm ready to answer them. Otherwise, I'll pass it back to Meredith.
Great, thank you so much, Luann. That was fantastic. I am going to go ahead and just wrap up this webinar today, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So just a reminder that an email will be sent out with the recording. Feel free to share with your networks, post in your newsletters, your blogs, etc. We'll try to synthesize the information from today in a really digestible way. Our next webinars, we talked a lot about La Niña today. If you'd like to learn more about what La Niña is, especially in the context of the Southeast, please join us on December 14th. We'll send out that registration link where we'll have someone from the National Weather Service Climate Prediction Center talk us through, and so in particular, La Niña. And then in January, we have a presentation on precipitation trends at the hourly scale in the Southeast. Also, before you leave us today, there will be a quick survey that comes up. If you haven't taken it before, please do. In particular, we'd love to hear any suggestions you have on future topics that we could invite guest speakers to talk to about. So what I'll do now is I'll go to the questions. Right now we have one related to, in fact, ENSO. And I'll open this up to any of our panelists to respond to at this point. I'm also happy to go back to a slide if needed. The question is, as I understand, El Nino typically begins in the Pacific Ocean and affects the weather globally. Where does La Niña originate? And again, next month's presentation will go into this in quite a bit of detail. I'll also post a link here, but would one of our panelists like to go ahead and respond to that question?
This is Pam. I can do that. La Nina and El Nino are kind of opposite phases of the same thing. So where El Nino starts in the eastern Pacific Ocean, La Nina also does. And in that case, where El Nino is warmer than usual ocean waters, when we have a La Nina, as we're in now, the ocean water there is cooler than normal. And so if you see satellite pictures of sea surface temperature, you can see that it's still tropical weather, so it's still fairly warm, but it's cooler than the long-term average.
Great, thank you, Pam. Does anybody else, any other panelists like to add to that? Okay. I will say on climate.gov, there is a, I was trying to look for the link right now, but there is a really great explanation of ENSO as the El Nino Southern Oscillation. Oh, thank you, Luann. You just put it in there for me. I will try to open it and add this to it. I really encourage you to check it out, and it includes all sorts of information. Okay, the next question we have is related to climate resilience. So Luann, I'm going to put this one to you. Are there any particular climate resilience opportunities included, or maybe this isn't relevant to you, included in the recently passed infrastructure bill? Anything we can focus our attention on? I may take a quick stab at this. There is a lot in the infrastructure bill related to climate resilience by nearly all federal agencies. At NOAA, there's going to be investments in terms of better monitoring and predicting flooding, lots of coastal resilience activities, just a ton of things going on. Department of Interior released a press release yesterday talking about their resilience related to wildfires and drought out west, et cetera. So I don't know if any of our other panelists has anything they would like to report on, but there is a lot out there, and I think that's a really interesting question. Maybe we can even have a future presentation on what it means in the Southeast in terms of that infrastructure bill and climate. Do any other panelists like to respond? Okay, I'll flag that for future topic. Typically, we really focus this webinar series more on climate conditions and trends and impacts, but I think it's perfectly appropriate to bring in resilience occasionally when it's, especially if we can link it and it's something as important as the infrastructure bill, so thank you. Okay, we have a question now on La Niña. Has anyone done a study on the impacts of the typical double dip La Niña? Impacts similar or same or more impactful of other oscillations? Just thinking of potential for upcoming winter weather events. The great question for next month, but perhaps maybe Pam, would you like to address this right now?
Yeah, double dip La Niñas are not that unusual. In fact, if you look at the long-term record for the last 100 years or so, double dip La Niñas happen almost as often as single dip La Niñas, whereas El Nino almost always occurs just for a single year. So that's one difference between the two of them. There have been some studies that have looked at the difference of a double or occasionally even a triple dip La Nina. Generally, I think the feeling is the second year the conditions are a little bit more mild, maybe not quite as much extreme. Of course, you have to keep in mind last year was not a typical first La Nina year either, because we had the sudden stratospheric warming effect or warming event that impacted our weather especially late in the winter. So every La Nina and El Nino are distinct, and every pattern of climate is a little bit different. But I think generally, typically, the second year of a double dip is a little bit milder, a little bit less statistically traditional, if you want to put it that way.
Thanks, Pam. Anyone else like to add? Okay, and we also have a comment. I think it's a great comment coming from colleagues in North Carolina that hopefully, as we talk about resiliency, it's certainly not just the federal government by any means. State agencies will continue to include resiliency as they provide the funding to their states, their communities, and to the systems. So thank you for that. Okay, that is all we have right now for questions. And so I think with that, we'll go ahead and just wrap it. And thank you all again for joining us. Extra thanks to our presenters, and enjoy what's left of the fall and the fall foliage. Take care, and we'll see you next month.